we could start by asking this question. What do the church, the family, and the state have to do with each other? Why do we care? After all, isn't it true that we have a family because the state gives us permission? And if the state takes away the permission for us to have a family, then we can't have a family anymore? Is that the way it works? How about the church? The state gives us permission to have a church. Somebody somewhere in some office someplace says, you know what? Let's write a regulation somewhere and we will allow the church to exist. And thus we can have a church. Is that how it works? Or is it just a little bit different? We're going to start by taking a look back in Genesis, and we're going to go through different areas of the scriptures this morning. This is just going to be pretty much of a perusal, but let me just, first of all, tell you what we're going to say, then I hope I'll be able to say it. And that is this. Here at IRBC, what we understand the Bible to teach is that God is sovereign over every sphere of life, and those who exercise those spheres must answer to Him in their roles, in their respective roles. God is above the government, no less and no differently than He is above the family. Therefore, if a police officer stops you and asks or requires of you to do something that he is not allowed to, he has no more legitimate authority over you than you do yourself. In fact, you have more. You, as a family member, have certain rights and privileges given to you by God, and responsibilities given to you by God, and a police officer does not have jurisdiction over every area of your life. Only some very, very limited areas. I knew a Christian police officer who didn't agree with that, who often said, hey, you know what? I have the badge and I have the uniform, and I'm in charge of you. You need to do what I say because what Romans 13 says. We'll take that quick look today at that Romans 13. But let's start in Genesis chapter 2. Actually, we'll start in Genesis 1. Genesis 2 kind of fleshes it out. Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. Now, I know we looked at this when we studied Psalm 8. But right here we have the reason why God created man. Given to us from His own words. What God said Himself. And oftentimes I think we miss the connection there to verse 27. God said, let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and so forth. So God created man, verse 27, in His own image. In the image of God He created them, male and female He created them. So we have God saying why He's going to create people, and then we have His act of creation. Now, when He says, so God created man in His own image, in the image of man God had created him, male and female He created them, do we not have the beginning of the family at that moment? Of course we do. There is the statement of the family. So when the dominion mandate was given, the family existed. Or was given directly to the family. Does the church exist at this moment? Or the state? Absolutely not. Where we have problems at the very beginning of our difficulties that we have, the state telling, if you follow the case of the German family, has anybody been following that? They're being given the old heave-ho out of apparently they've lost their case. We have the state telling a family what they can and cannot do as far as the education of their children. And it is their children. Now we hear that statement all the time, don't we? We hear politicians saying, our children. You ever hear that one? Our children. Whoa. Run! Our children? not our children. There's your children, there's my children. There's not our children when they do that kind of stuff. So what we see happening is the very beginning of our issues happen when the state or the church begins to take dominion over an area that was promised and delivered to the family. The state seeks to take dominion over everything now. And we have a lot of people, even in Christian circles, saying, well, hey, we can have a church if the state allows us. We can educate our children a certain way if the state allows us. So I love Virginia's homeschooling law. Virginia's great homeschooling law. You simply sign a waiver that says I'm doing this for religious purposes and the state's out of it. Actually, you shouldn't even have to do that, really. That's too much. Because you still got the permission thing going on. Still, at least we don't have to do like what we had to do. Lived in the Reading Area School District. What a joke that was, I'm going to tell you. We had to submit had to go and talk to someone at the Reading Area School District and submit our plans for the year and make sure they were up to Pennsylvania standards. We were going into a building, it was like a jail, I kid you not. I mean, they were just thrilled if they could get through the day without someone knifing someone else. And there we were presenting our plans. And someone was looking over, oh, is this up to Pennsylvania standards? You have no jurisdiction over that. No legitimate legal jurisdiction over that, starting in Genesis chapter 1. Dominion mandate given to the family. Now, what does the family have to do, though, with the church and the state? Can it be possible that you can have a legitimate state without a legitimate family? Well, let's take a quick look at Genesis chapter 22. Actually, let's go to Genesis 18 first. Genesis 18:16, excuse me. And a critical chapter, I think, in the Bible, and a critical verse, because God here is going to combine the idea of the family and the idea of the state or of the nation together here. And he's going to tell us about the relationship between the two. Because what's happening, first of all, Genesis 18, of course, is the run of Genesis 19. Genesis 19 is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18 is the run-up to it. What's happening prior? Look at verse 16. The men rose from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, this is, I believe, the Lord speaking in front of Abraham, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Meaning, shall I hide from Abraham the fact that I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah here? Shall I hide it? And I think he's saying, like, he's not answering a question like, what shall I do? I think he's more making a statement. Shall I hide them? No, I'm not going to hide this. And the reason why, he tells us in the next verse, since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. All right, pretty cool statement there. Abraham's going to become a great nation. Well, how's it going to happen? Why Abraham and not someone else? How's this work? The next verse tells us exactly how this works. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. Now, what in the world did God just say? God just told us how Abraham is going to become a mighty nation. And it's not through the ways that we would think. He's going to become a nation because he's going to teach his children after him. That's how it's going to happen. Now think about it. If no one teaches their own children righteousness, justice, then no one's going to learn it, right? Now today we look to the state to keep us safe and to do the right thing and make us wealthy and healthy and happy and wise. But look what's going to happen through the teaching of children. Look at this. keep the way of the Lord, do righteousness and justice. And what God's saying there is that, you know what, Abraham? If you don't teach the way of the Lord, and if you don't teach righteousness, and if you don't teach justice, then it ain't going to happen. It's not going to take place. And he's saying that to us today. You teach your children. Now, I'd like to think here at IRBC we're not kidding ourselves. We have a little Sunday school for those who want to attend ages 3 through 8. If you want to be involved, fine. If not, fine. But I tell you what, we can't do much. We can't do much in 40 minutes or whatever once a week. Can't do it. If you, dads, moms, don't teach your children, they will not learn it. It's not going to happen. And the interesting thing is, and I know I go back to this quote again and again, I've said it so many times, I probably should have it memorized by now. But Charles Francis Potter, he understood it, signer of the Humanist Manifesto 1, he got it. And he talked about education, he talked about why they want to take the children out of the home and put them in the school. He got it. He understood it, saying, education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every American school is a school of humanism. I said this back in 1930. What can a theistic Sunday schools meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of the 5-day program of humanistic teaching? So one of the things that we believe here at IRBC is that we believe we have a very limited, if you will, an influence, yes. We do have an influence with your children. We're thrilled to have it. We covet that influence. But you know what? We aren't kidding ourselves. That influence is very limited. The real influences are you, Mom, and you, Dad. All right. One more thing about this. I just want to focus in on that statement there, to do righteousness and justice. To do right. Wait a minute. I thought the state was in charge of justice. What do you mean he's putting justice on Abraham's children here? And that Abraham has to teach the children's justice. Well, once again, if it's not taught in the home, it's never going to get anywhere else. You and I know that you can have a family without a state, and you can have a family without a church. But if you don't have a family, you don't have a church, and you don't have a state, you have nothing if you don't have a family here. And I believe this is what God is doing right here, because he's going to go down, and he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's given Abraham a very vivid lesson here. And he's saying, Abraham, you see what's happening to Sodom and Gomorrah here? This is what happens in a nation where righteousness and justice are not taught in the home. That's the lesson being taught here. It's vivid, it's clear, it's unmistakable. Anybody have any questions about that? I hope I'm being clear on this. Any questions on that at all? This is a lesson Abraham will not forget tomorrow morning. I'll say, what was that was happening yesterday? Oh, yeah, I remember now. No, Abraham would never forget this one. Any questions on that at all? Do you believe that we can see the results of not teaching? You see, we have much to complain about. But what are we doing about it? You and I think we know in this room that if we don't do this like Abraham was commanded. I love this. He said, for I've known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him. Love that. We sometimes say, well, okay, I'll work with my children. But, it just wasn't his children, his household. Abraham had a lot of influence. And he had a lot of servants. We've talked about that. So he wasn't limiting his influence to his children. It was reaching out to his household as well. You and I, we have influence in our own families. What about our influence outside our families? How are we using that? So, what we see here this morning then is that the dominion mandate given to the family, and we see the unit, if you will, or the means that righteousness, justice is going to spread throughout the earth, is going to be through teaching the next generation. That's how it's going to happen here. Any questions on that at all? Okay. No questions. All right, let's move towards Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs 1, the Proverb of Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, giving us his words of wisdom. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. This is why he's saying he wrote these things. To be wise, to be instructed, to understand. And then, same phrase there, verse 3, to receive the instructions of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Sounds like what we just saw Abraham was supposed to teach his family. Give prudence to the simple. Young man, knowledge, discretion. Understand, verse 6. Verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And verse 8, my son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother. The wisest man who ever lived is going to give us instruction. And how is he, in what context is he going to give us instruction? He's going to give us instruction as if we were in the context of the family. Do you see why those who hate God, hate his word, hate the family? Because they rightfully see an alternative power source and an alternative authority source. They properly see it. What a shame that we don't see it. Our enemies do. Just last night I observed, and this is like a parallel situation, but I observed a discussion going on between some folks, and it was over the issue of homosexuality. And one of the people who comes from a Christian home, or somewhat of a Christian home, I happen to know the home, came out and said, well, the Bible really doesn't say anything about this. The Bible doesn't prohibit it, and came on with a bunch of, Greek study and so forth. The Bible doesn't really prohibit it. Later on, one of the person who on the thread who is homosexual came out with all this antipathy towards the Bible. Do you see what's going on? The homosexual understood what the Bible actually had to say about it better than the guy who was from the Christian home. Believe me, they get it. We don't. They do. And that's the way it is with the family. They hate the family, want to destroy it. And we're all too willing to give over to them what belongs to the family. They get it, we don't. Now again, this is a little bit different here at IRBC. We teach that the family is an authoritative entity set up by God, answers to God, and not to the state. That is getting to become a somewhat minority view, I'm afraid, in some Christian circles. I've talked to homeschoolers even. Just all concerned about the latest pronouncement from the state. Just wondering if they'll be allowed to do this or that, if some bureaucrat says they can. Bureaucrat has no authority from Christ over the family. Questions on that? We go throughout this. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother. My son, verse 10, if sinners entice you, do not consent. You see what Solomon's doing there? He's contrasting. This is very strong language here. He's contrasting the law of mom and dad with sinners enticing. When the 60s came along and the hippies in their smoke-filled VW vans and their psychedelic outfits and they were teaching to question authority, man. What was that authority aimed at? The authority, if you remember, if you've read about that time, was mostly aimed at mom and dad. And a whole generation were enticed by sinners. An entire generation, drugged out of their minds, pretty much useless, decided that mom and dad didn't know anything, and they did exactly what Proverbs 1:10 tells you not to do. See, again, at IRBC here, one of the things that I can't emphasize this enough, we recognize and believe that if the family fails at home, this church can never be any better than the family at home. Never. We cannot do with the family, we cannot undo with the family, we can't destroy the family, but we can't be any better than the family. We simply cannot do it. Now, any questions so far? Yes? Tim?
Comment.
Yes?
That I think I counted, I don't know if it's an accurate counting, but I think there's 21 references in the book of Proverbs. Very similar. Fathers instruct, fathers instruct, fathers instruct, fathers instruct, fathers instruct. So I think it's pretty clear that we know what our job is. And the hard part is doing it. That's the hard part.
Well, yeah, but I think, I don't know, Tim, I think you might be ahead of the curve here. And I'm gonna, well, if I do what I'm about to do, no one's ever gonna tell me anything anymore. So, but Tim and I have talked about this, and I've mentioned how tough I found family devotions to be, how difficult. It's time for devotions, and boy, does everybody have a reason why we can't do this. Would have been better earlier. I mean, I know, I've heard them. We should have done it earlier. Can't we do it later? The whole thing. How long is it going to be? How about if we do it tomorrow night? All this. But I think some folks have found maybe a solution for that. I never was able to instruct my family in the morning. I just wasn't able to do that, but some people have been able to do that. And I understand that it's a little bit easier in the morning before everybody has all their plans in place than in the evening, right, Tim? Yeah. So if you want to know how to do this well, don't see me. I struggled with this. Although, by the grace of God, the Lord was very good to me with the homeschool. I was able to do more of the walking by the way, sitting in your house, rise up, that kind of thing. You do have that opportunity. The Bible doesn't say quit if you can't do family devotions. The Bible actually talks more about the walking by the way, sit down, rise up, than it does about the family devotions, if you will. But certainly both are a good idea. But I gotta tell you, I struggled. How many kids do I have here at mine? 4, 5. Yeah, I can count. Okay. If you don't believe me, you can ask them about how I struggle to do that. Still, we fail, men. We fail if we decide that it's anybody else's job other than ours. That's failure already. That's built-in failure at that moment. Thanks for the comment. Yes, Seth.
I think verse 8 just needs a little bit of qualification, because there is already an assumption there that this is not just a blanket, and we all know this. Hear my son, your father's instructions, and forsake not your mother's teaching. The assumption there is that their instruction and their teaching is going to be godly.
Yeah, the assumption is it's based on verses 1 through 7.
And I mean, it is just amazing how, that's something that we've been so convinced of. I remember in my own life growing up, and every time I got disciplined, it was always blue. You broke our rules, you broke our rules, you broke our rules. And I always would say, well, I can't wait till I'm 18. Then I get to make my own rules. And what I never got from the whole, discipline aspect was, I'm not breaking mom and dad's rules because they don't actually have any that are worth anything. I'm breaking God's rules, which they're to enforce. And I think that is something that, just cannot be overstressed enough, that what is our motivation for disciplining our children? Is it just that we have a set of standards, we have rules, and we have this, and you broke what we did, so therefore, you're gonna get punished because you didn't do, what I think you should do? Or is it, we're enforcing what God has given us, and when you break God's rules, there are consequences, and we're simply upholding that. And that needs to be worked out, I think, in everybody's family, but, yeah, I think a lot of times we do kind of just blow past verse 8 without stopping to realize the qualification, the assumption that's already there. Is our instruction really even godly? What are we doing as parents to make sure that we actually know what instruction should be? That we have the right teaching that we're giving our children? Or are we just giving them our opinions and our,
Right.
Yeah,
righteousness and justice there with Abraham. Oftentimes our discipline, I've done it. I've done the discipline and anger, and it wasn't about righteousness or justice at all. It was about my own particular piece at that moment, and my own little world. They were ruining my own little world, and now I'm gonna lash out in anger. I had nothing to do with righteousness and justice. And that's the problem with disciplining children, isn't it? It disciplines me. I'd rather not be disciplined. It's just too much. Yeah, great. Yes, Tim.
Just one other comment. Sorry.
That's all right. No, we're good.
No,
We're good.
the Proverbs
Yes.
are a great book for instructing your family.
Every day.
We're in Proverbs every day. We've now gone through it, I don't know how many times, maybe 8 times.
You just have it memorized.
You said, tell you.
Oh, they know it, you say it, you say
Yeah.
the first 2 words and they've got it, because,
Yeah.
not because we're asking them to memorize it.
Right.
But, yeah, we do other things, but every day we're in the Proverbs, and it's
Sure.
a great instruction book.
Sure.
For children and family, you hit every topic.
Yeah. It has them all.
And you can refer to other scripture, but just a
Sure.
comment,
Well, the Proverbs, there's 2 books in the Bible that talk primarily, that talk more about the fear of the Lord than the other 2 books. And those 2 books are Proverbs and Deuteronomy.
yeah.
And Deuteronomy, of course, is an encapsulation. It's Deuteronomy encapsulates the first 4 books. It's Moses' commentary, if you will, on the first 4 books. And that's why I always, I always joke about it, including the Psalms and Proverbs in our New Testament, our New Testament, because again, if you're going to include Psalms and Proverbs, you should include Deuteronomy. They're saying the same thing. And now once you include Deuteronomy, well, you might as well open the door of the whole Testament. It's back. So, anyway, that's just the way that works. I remember my mother. We growing up, we would be considered poor by some standards. I still remember 1976, we got a 66 Impala. And that was 10 years within the present, and that was the closest we'd ever had to the present year. Okay, sounds poor, I still remember the holes in my jeans and all that kind of stuff. And so, it seemed like our neighbors had better stuff and cooler stuff than we had. So we were constantly asking my mother to go to our neighbors. I still remember my mother spoke with clarity to that point from Proverbs. Remove yourself often from your neighbor's house, lest he grow weary of thee and hate thee. Don't be going over there all the time. If you do, they're going to hate you after a while. That's really, really basic instruction there. Didn't have to write to Ann Landers for that one. It's like right there. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of a neighbor who wants to be at your house too much, that's the way it works. After a while, you hate them. Good stuff. Anyone else? Before we go on to... Okay, we want to take a minute now because we're talking about the family, the church, and the state. We're emphasizing the fact that at IRBC, we teach that they each have their own sphere of influence and sphere responsibility, I should say. It's probably a better word than sovereignty, responsibility. I know that there's people that I've spoken to that really question the idea of whether a civil magistrate will answer to God as a civil magistrate. But God is Lord of the state, is he not? And so one of the things that we teach here and we emphasize is that, and you've heard, render the things to Caesar, the things that are Caesar's, and God the things that are God's. You hear that all the time. We want to emphasize here that Caesar is to obey God just like everybody else. And Caesar is to obey God as Caesar. Caesar doesn't get the privilege of saying, well, hey, you know what, I went forward in church and I prayed to receive Christ. Now I can do whatever I want. No, Caesar. God has rules for you in your capacity as a civil magistrate. Now, you're saying, well, that's no big deal. Well, of course that's the case. Let me ask you, do you know Christians who don't believe that? I'd be shocked if you don't know Christians that believe that. I just heard a man talking recently on the radio. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was a sermon I was listening to. And this person actually said that Jesus' kingdom, since it was not of this world, John 18:36, and what that really meant was he didn't get his authority from here. You read the rest of the verse, John 18:36. He said that, the Romans never really understood that Jesus' kingdom wasn't of this world. If they would have understood that, they would have let him go. They wouldn't have done anything to him. Same way with Herod, right? If they just would have understood that Jesus he wants to be king of your heart. Herod, it's okay. And by the time we're done with it, we almost have the idea that Herod could accept Jesus as his personal savior and still go out and kill the babies. I mean, that's almost what we believe by the time we're done. No, Herod has to obey God in his capacity as king. My friends, that is a minority view nowadays in Christian circles. That's not a mainstream view. And they quote all the time, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God, as if God has no jurisdiction over Caesar. Here's Caesar's department, and over here's God's department. Now, having said that, let's quickly go and we'll wrap up with our favorite passage, Romans chapter 13. Actually, before we do that, let's 1 Samuel 8, before we do that. We'll get to Romans 13, maybe. 1 Samuel 8. Yes, I'm finding it. It is the book that comes before 1 Samuel. All right, or before 2 Samuel. Yeah, there we go. Samuel is trying to talk the people out of a king. And he says this. He says in verse 10, so Samuel told all the people, this is 1 Samuel 8:10. And he's basically saying, your king's going to be a tyrant. You think he's going to protect you. That's how they started out. We want a king to go out before us when we fight in the battles. We want a king to protect us. Samuel's going to say, he's not going to protect you, he's going to attack you. That's what he's saying. Look what he says. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. Verse 11 of 1 Samuel 8. And he said, this will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. And as I read this, I'm going to ask you to note every time yours and his are mentioned. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s, will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants. Do you see what Samuel's doing here? He's giving the responsibility of the property, and please understand this. You and I do not own property because the state says we can. The property owned here was already owned by the family. Do you see that? That's why Samuel's saying he will take it from you. Because it's yours. We saw the same thing happen in 1 Kings 17, where God told Elijah to go stand in the vineyard of Naboth. King Ahab, the wicked king, at the instigation of his even more wicked wife, had Naboth and his family stoned to death. Ahab is going to have to take possession of it, and God tells Elijah to go stand in the vineyard of Naboth. Well, Naboth was dead, but it was still Naboth's. And the fact that the king comes and takes this property doesn't make it his. It just makes him a thief. I'm going to tell you something. What I just said there, that is a definite distinctive of IRBC. I can tell you that right now. Because the way we think most of the time with the state, they can't steal anything. Anything that we have is lent to us by them. They own everything. But we know that's not true. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Any questions on that, what we just said? Yes, Wes.
Did that passage in 1 Samuel, does that mean like, is it wrong to have a king? You know what
No,
I mean?
it's not saying that it's wrong to have a king.
Why it's like they're being punished, why, or what was their motive for wanting a king, you know what I mean, like?
God actually says the motive in verse 8. According to all the works they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. That's not what I want. Okay, verse 7, sorry. Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So at this point in their career, they're done with having God. And the thing that really gives it away is they say, and they give it away. Verse 5, you are old, your sons do not walk your ways, now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. We want to be like everybody else. The other nations don't have God reigning over them. We'd like to be like them. It's really shameful what they're doing here. It's unforgivable. Yes?
Now, when it says this stuff, is it saying like the king is going to steal that stuff, or is it saying it becomes his right because you appointed him a king? It becomes his right to take, to build an army. He needs, or is he doing something wrong? Like when David had an army, was he stealing from the people, or was he just doing what?
Right.
His right. I mean, that's what you kind of like say. That's just what you're going to get.
I think there's two things happening here. First of all, they could fight, and they did fight prior to the king mustering the troops. It was on a voluntary basis. So what Samuel's saying here is, the voluntary basis thing, that's over. He's going to appoint people, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So in his statement here, I believe he's saying this is your punishment here. Not that much different from when they were being carried off. For example, when Nebuchadnezzar carries off the children of Israel, is it his right to do that? No, he's still doing the wrong thing by doing that, but that is what they had asked for, and that was their punishment that they were receiving.
So is it wrong then when, was it wrong when Saul and David and Solomon were doing that? Was it also wrong on their end to do that?
We'd have to do a little bit more study in Deuteronomy 20, because in Deuteronomy 20, that's where the rules of warfare are laid down. And kings were prohibited from having a standing army. They're prohibited from multiplying horses and chariots, just like they were prohibited from multiplying wives. Wives then were often alliances, if you will, with other nations. And the idea was that, I married this guy's daughter and this guy's niece or whatever, this king, then we're never going to fight each other because we're fighting family. Of course, we know how that worked out in Europe when they did that kind of stuff all the time. It's almost like they fought more. But that's what's going on between Henry VIII, for example, marrying Catherine of Aragon, Spanish queen. He was trying to do that kind of thing. No, I do not believe this passage, in any case, gives that king the right to do that. I'll tell you why. We see forced taxation only here and only in foreign pagan governments. Forced taxation, where you must pay or you're gonna get in trouble. We never see that under Moses, and we never see that under the time of the judges. The people here ask for it. No different from what we do, ask for higher taxes to fix the roads. We're already paying higher taxes if roads aren't fixed. Yes,
There's additional commentary in verses 18 to 20.
yes,
Then you will cry out in that day because the king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. That shows that it's punishment.
yes.
But it also shows their motivation. Nevertheless, the people refused and said, no, but there shall be a king over us, so that we also may be like all nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So they were tired of this going out and fighting their battles. They're gonna have a king, and he's gonna give me a free lunch.
Welfare state. And
Right?
foreign policy, welfare state.
So, I mean, there's commentary there on what
Yes.
this is about.
Yes,
He was not given rights, it was a punishment.
yes.
And
Yes.
I think you would have to study it out a little bit more, but I mean, just on the surface even, when we look at, say, like David, we see that David wants to build a temple. So what does he do? Say, hey, everybody building a temple, so this is what you all gotta pay. No, it was bring your offerings to the Lord, because we wanna build this temple, and people just start bringing. And I think you can make the argument that you see the same thing even within his army, that yes, he's got captains and those around him. You can also understand them as military advisors. But there again, I think his army system is one more of what we would see today. Yes, he has an army, but he has not forced anyone to be in that army. It is a voluntary sign up to serve in that army. And I think, and again, I know this would make some people mad, but you would look at, modern Israel today. You don't have a choice. You're 18, you serve. It's just how it is. And I would say that type of a forced service is again what we see here under Saul.
Anti-scriptural.
Right.
Sure,
And we had a play when David numbered the men, to
right,
see how many he could conscript,
Yep.
should he need them.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that was, David ran into a plague at that point. God took away the very people that he was trying to number to brag about how great he was. Yes, Tim?
Is this kind of what you're talking about in service, the covetousness? I mean, they were really coveting other nations.
Absolutely,
And so-
absolutely.
So it was because of that idolatry
And it was like that, that's the right word.
yeah,
Yes.
having a king, they idolize that.
Yeah.
Can't speak, but, so that's what, so the guy gave it to him, but that was also, there was consequences of them getting what they asked for.
Right. And then the consequences, we don't have time to look at it. It happened, he says, they're gonna cry out to me one day, and I'm not gonna listen. And we know when that happened. And and their king got them in so much trouble, and it ruined the nation. And the day that happened, when they cried out to the Lord and he didn't hear, was the day that the kingdom split. When Jeroboam took 10 tribes and went north. That's when it all happened. So the king, the very thing that they asked for here, the king that's gonna solve all the problems, absolutely increased the problems. Made it worse than it ever was before. Yes, the sorrow will increase as they hastened after another God. Yes, well said. Yes, with Mary.
Could the case be made that Samuel is telling them about a king in particular? Is he talking about all kings for all time, or is
No.
he saying this, maybe, could the case be made, maybe he's only talking about Saul?
Yeah, well, he's talking primarily about Saul. Because if you study 1 Samuel, you can trace the things that he did line up with what he said here. But he says, but see, he is talking about particular Saul, because show them the behavior of the king, verse 9, not kings necessarily, but of the king who will reign over them. And I think the bigger picture here is, if you decide that you don't want God to reign over you, Samuel is building a picture here of what you're going to get. And it's inevitable. This is, I mean, what else could it possibly be? I don't want God to rule over us. What's that sound like, by the way? Do we hear something similar in the New Testament to what these guys are saying here? We have no king but Caesar. and talking about Christ, we will not have this man to rule over us. That's pretty similar to what we're seeing here. Yes?
But then they're blessed with David, who's a king, who's a great king. And it's kind of like, well, he does some of this stuff too, but is it bad when he does it?
Actually, I don't think David did do this kind of thing. One of the things that we see, and we don't have time for it, but there was a time when Saul killed all the priests in a certain area. And the reason why he was able to do that, he was able to promise, and this is what tyrants do. They take property from their people, and then they reward their henchmen with the property that they took. And we see Saul doing that kind of a thing. I don't see David doing that kind of a thing, and now maybe I'm missing it. But Saul did that kind of stuff all the time. At one point, he even said to him, he says that, and he was contrasting himself with David. And he said, now you guys follow me, I'll tell you why. That son of Jesse, he's not going to give you houses and lands and goods like I'm going to give you. Saul was right. David wasn't going to do that. And but where did Saul get houses and lands? Where did he get that from? Was he a really good businessman? No, we first find Saul himself going after his father's donkey. Remember that? Saul did not come from a real wealthy background. He didn't have this kind of stuff to hand out for prizes to his buds. He only got that from his neighbors. Good questions, yes.
Is the,
Subjects, I should say.
the wanting a king, isn't that really a faith issue? I mean, at the end of the day, Israel didn't have maybe the faith that God was going to go before them, continue to go before them like he had prior without a king. Was it a faith issue? Just thinking out loud.
Well, yes, and I think it's a faith issue in this sense. You'll remember 1 Samuel was written during really the time of the judges. Samuel, in a sense, was the last judge. Now, they certainly had the evidence that God was for them throughout the time of the judges. They had the evidence. What they're asking for here, I believe, is we want someone to go and fight our battles. Yes, this past time during the judges, if we were to be delivered, we had to turn back to God. I think what they're saying is, from now on, we want to be delivered without having to do all that. I really think that's what they're saying here. That's what they're asking for. It's really bad. It's worse than you thought it was. It's terrible. Yes, sir.
And I think about this whole David and Saul thing. I mean, the easiest distinction to draw is, you've got verse 18 of this passage in Samuel. In that day you will cry out because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves. And you contrast that with the fact that you will never find God ever calling Saul my anointed king. Yet all the time about David, he says, David is my anointed king. You chose your king, but I've chosen mine. And I think that is found all through the passages that talk about the distinction between, David and Saul. Is one is God's anointed, one is not. Let's not forget that yes, David's a man after God's own heart. That does not make him a perfect ruler nor a perfect man. I mean, clearly we can find in Scripture some problems David had.
Yeah.
But I do think that his rule overall, if you study it out, was faithful to the laws that God had put in place. And I think we just read the Psalms and see how much he talks about. He loves the law of God, primarily speaking about, the law we find in Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
Sure. That's all the only law there was. Proverbs hadn't even been written yet. Proverbs are our safety valve that we're allowed to believe. Well, we don't have time. Let's do it. 5 minutes. Romans 13. We're not going to go past this. Romans 13. Real quick. Let every soul be subject, Romans 13:1, to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. So a lot of people stop and say, hey, you know what, that says we obey the government, carte blanche, whatever they say, it's the voice of God. For rulers, but let's go on. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Oh, there's a qualification for you now, isn't it? Whoa. The rulers, Paul says, that I'm talking about are rulers that terrorize bad people and promote good people. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Yeah, from rulers that terrorize the wicked. And by the way, in any society, someone's going to be terrorized, right? Either you're going to be terrorized about doing evil, or you're going to be terrorized about doing good, right? One or the other. Somebody's going to be in the closet. For he is God's minister, God's deacon to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid. He does not bear the sword in vain. Well, we're talking about execution here. For he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Now, when we're talking about practicing evil, what can we possibly be talking about here? How do we define evil? U.S. Constitution? Communist Manifesto? Humanist Manifesto? What document defines evil? That would be the one that God gave us, wouldn't it? So, Paul is really clear here. The job of the civil magistrate is to execute vengeance on those who break God's law in a capital way or a capital offense. That's why I talk about the sword, capital offense. Therefore, you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Now, we have some people, and I've heard them say, well, this is the Old Testament law, it's done. God, Paul's not talking about law, God's law. He's just talking about whatever the civil magistrate says. Well, let's see. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, custom, so forth, fear, honor, so forth. Verse 8, don't owe anyone anything except to love one another. And then Paul goes into, guess what? God's law. For the commandments, adultery, murder, steal, false witness, covet. So if Paul is saying, well, we don't have the law anymore, he sure is kind of going to a funny place to demonstrate it, isn't it? 10 Commandments. And you see, we do have a reason here as we wrap up. Maybe take one or two questions, but as we wrap this up here, verse 7 is verse 6 and 7 are critical. For because of this, you also pay taxes. Here we have a statement of why we pay taxes. Right here. It's missed by so many. We pay taxes so that our neighbors can have babies and get paid for the babies and they can produce more babies. And we pay taxes so that we can send our children off to the government school. We pay tax. We have the right here. Because of this, you also pay taxes. Because of what? We pay taxes so that the civil magistrate can execute wrath on those who break God's law. That's why we pay taxes. There's no carte blanche here. There's no open check here. We pay taxes for this reason. That's why. Again, my friends, you will find, if you haven't already, that's a definite IRBC distinctive. Right there. Very definitely. We have time for one question. All right, two. So we asked one. Okay, one question. Yes.
The argument that I always hear, and I'm usually on the outside of this when he's arguing this, is that, well, Paul wrote this at a time when the Roman government, which was a tyrannical government, and he was telling those people that they had to obey that Roman government. So,
Yeah, the question, well, Paul lived in a tyrannical government, and he was telling the people they had to obey that government. Actually, that argument, I think, answers itself, because it's making it time sensitive. In other words, it's making it like, well, okay, they had to do that then, what about us now? See, it's not time sensitive, and it has nothing to do with who was in power and who wasn't in power at the time. That is irrelevant. What's relevant is what it actually says, is that rulers are to terrorize evildoers. And that's why we pay taxes, as they do that. That's it. The fact that Nero was or was not in charge at the time this was written, irrelevant. Why would it matter? Honestly. Yes?
So what do you do with the civil magistrate that actually punishes the good and does good to the evil. Just saying it might happen today.
Yeah, never really heard of it, but you've heard of a case where that could possibly happen.
So how do you, I mean, how do you, what should be our perspective towards that civil magistrate?
Sure. And we see that, I believe what happened with David, David got himself a group of warriors there in the wilderness of En-Gedi, and it says these people owed money. And it doesn't look like they owed their neighbor money. It looks like these were people that Saul had taken their property, and they just had nothing left. And we know that Saul had no qualms about destroying his enemies through any means necessary. Look what he did to David, who basically saved his bacon there against the Philistines. So we know that he didn't have a problem doing that. So there they were, taxed out of their inheritance, if you will, and David becomes their champion, or their captain. Two things to always remember. It says they don't bear the sword in vain. Well, the state will always have the sword. And the state will either use that for righteousness or injustice. So we can't forget that they have the sword. And is it legitimate to pay the taxes at the point of the gun? I believe it is. I believe that's what we see Gideon, for example, doing that. There at the threshing floor, the Midianites were overrunning the country. But what is supposed to happen first? I would argue that when kings got out of control in the Old Testament, the first line of defense was not the family, but it was the prophets, meaning the church. And I believe the first thing that's supposed to happen here, if that happens, is that the Church of Jesus Christ is to speak up. Because the individual families themselves are not going to be a match. And if the church doesn't speak up prophetically, you have almost no defense at all. Almost none.
That's what the prophets.
That's what they were. That's what they did again and again. But the Church of Jesus Christ is basically saying, you know what? That's Caesar's department. We can't speak to that. Wow. Yes, one last question, yes.
I don't know if you would agree with this, but when it says, "For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God," is that saying like an ungodly, if you're ungodly, you're not really an authority? Or how would you put it, like, when it says there, for there is no authority except from God. If it's not godly, then it's not an authority? Is that what he's saying here? Or?
Yeah, let me see if I can illustrate it this way. Daniel becomes governor there in Babylon, and they come up with the most thoroughgoing statement ever. The law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed, for 30 days you can't pray to another god. Now, this is critical. Daniel goes and he prays 3 times like he did before. Is Daniel commanded to pray 3 times? Anywhere in God's law that you are commanded to pray towards Jerusalem 3 times a day? Nowhere that I found. Nowhere. Daniel could have complied with that law. He could have done it and still not broken God's law. I do believe that. That's a little bit different from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. They would have had to have broken God's law in order to obey Nebuchadnezzar. Not so Daniel in his case. Now Daniel goes and does it anyway. I've often speculated how we would counsel Daniel if he came to us and asked, should I keep doing it? I think we'd say, oh damn, the Bible will say you have to. I think I'm going to take a break for 30 days. I think that's what we'd say. But Daniel goes and does it anyway. And I think that's Daniel's way of saying, you have no legitimate authority over me in this area. You may be king, and you may be king legitimately, but you have stepped outside your bounds. You have no right to do this. I think that's what he's saying. And so when any king or any authority steps out of their God-restricted bounds, their authority stops at that moment. They have no legitimate authority. I've taught in other places that since Christ says all authority is given to me in heaven and earth, that means that every sphere of authority ultimately traces back to God. And if any authority, if anybody's claiming authority, they can't trace it back to God, it's probably illegitimate authority at that moment.
So,
You know what, you guys can all just leave and keep talking.
you had said earlier about questioning authority.
Yes.
And the smoke-filled Volkswagen. I think to a degree, we should be teaching our children to question ungodly authority. Otherwise, they're gonna need a permit to put a garden in, or, you know how.
Right. Yeah, we must always, we must always question the source of authority.
Right.
And we see that happening. People needing permits to put a garden in the front yard, for Pete's sake. Okay, where does that authority come from as far as God's word is concerned? We have a wonderful document called the Bible here, with which we can use. I mean, we live in a time of accountability, right? We're all about accountability. Guess what? If you don't know your Bible, you can't keep anybody accountable. It just can't happen. Yes?
Can you just briefly address Jesus' words title? You have no authority.
Okay, the question was, can I just briefly address Jesus' words of Pilate? And Christ, you have no authority over me. And Christ, right. Yeah, and Christ did say that to Pilate. Pilate, who had tremendous dictatorial powers. Can you imagine have the power to be able to just kill a bunch of Jews and mix it with their own sacrifices and say, that's what I think of you guys. He is a vile man. There's no doubt about that.
Jesus says authority is given from God.
That's right. Yeah, and what he's saying there is, you think, Pilate, you have all this power and you have all this authority. Guess what? It really comes from my Father. Which was a very gutsy thing to say in that situation. Wow.
They use the word authority, not power.
Yes, that's right. Keep going.
So, the legitimate authority, Christ used the word authority.
Right. And I don't think he was saying that you're using it legitimately here. He was saying, that was not a stamp of approval the way Pilate was using his authority. He was just saying, any authority you have, any legit authority, you have, it comes from me. It comes from my Father. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. We've kind of run this a little bit late here today. We're glad, oh Lord, that you have given us your document, your words, your text on everything that matters. Shame on us for not knowing what it says. Oh Lord, we repent of that. May we dig deeper, and may we be like your servant there in Proverbs that cried out after wisdom and lifted up his voice for understanding. Oh Lord, may that be us. May we truly seek for wisdom and understanding as if it's a jewel. And only then will we have any kind of understanding whatsoever. Oh Lord, give us that understanding as we study your word. It's in Christ's name we pray it. Amen.